We've talked a lot about cross-development.
We sure have.
Crossing your platforms lately. But, you know...
Platform crossing, everybody.
One thing that we've been approaching...
That's what we're going to call it.
But we haven't gotten there yet, because there's some controversy around it, is MonoDevelop. But you know what? We've decided we're going to just throw caution to the wind. And in this episode, we're going to take an in-depth look at MonoDevelop.
And this in-depth look is brought to you, of course, by the fine few people of
GoDaddy.com. At GoDaddy.com.
At GoDaddy.com.
You can use the code Linux to save 10%. Come on,
Are we
man.
doing a do-over?
No, I'm keeping this.
Oh, crap. Linux, and then there's Linux 20. Those are the two keywords.
Linux 20.
It's 20% on Linux hosting.
On hosting.
On Linux just hosting.
On hosting.
Linux is 10% on anything.
Linux is 10% on anything.
But Linux 20 with the numbers 20 is on the hosting.
On hosting.
20%.
20%. That's a pretty good deal.
It's great.
Thanks for the support when you use those codes. All right, so we teased we were going to talk about MonoDevelop, and we said there's some controversy, so I thought, why don't we kick off before we get going too far? What's the controversy about?
There's no controversy.
It's basically the fact
Mono is rad.
that Mono is a runtime environment, right? There's the Mono runtime that lets you run .NET code, and .NET code, or C#.
.NET is the C# and .NET comes from the folks over at Microsoft. And of course they own that, and of course Mono being the open implementation
of the runtime,
and of a lot of the
language.
.NET framework. Of course, there's a lot of concern there that Microsoft could come along and sue out of existence everyone who's ever touched Mono.
There's some patent concerns there.
It's not going to happen, guys. It's just if it was going to happen, it was going to happen already. And, and if you're really that concerned about this, you know, do a little bit of searching online. There's a lot of FUD going around. It's just not going to happen.
Here's the thing.
That's just crazy.
It's
crazy talk.
Here's how you know is because Microsoft's going to look at it from a dollars and cents perspective.
They like monies.
And they're going to say, well, we can make 5 to 10 million suing Novell over Mono, or we can make billions and billions and billions of dollars over the next 20 years by people using our architecture and our
this is exactly
our .NET stuff.
It's much more to their advantage to have Mono around than it is to not have Mono around.
But that said, there's still some people that are really freaked out by Mono.
Really freaked out. Now, if you've been running a GNOME desktop over the last couple of years, you'll notice that more and more Mono apps are finding their way in. You've got Banshee, Tomboy, F-Spot. So
there's a new chat program that's Mono based. So there's a lot of stuff.
This is the thing. You know, some of the
people are getting a little less freaked about it.
They're getting less freaked about it, and rightly so. So this is a very good thing. Now, of course, Mono being what it is, Mono allows you to run the same C# or VB.NET or other language, but we'll get into that briefly, applications on a variety of platforms, be it Linux, Windows, OS X, etc. You can even get Mono on like the Nokia Internet tablets.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. Not by default, but it's very portable and it's all over the place.
So this goes right along with your whole write once, run anywhere, or run anywhere with very few changes.
Right, exactly. So Java has always had the write once, run anywhere thing, where you compile it once and it runs anywhere.
Good job, Java.
Now, a lot of the cross-platform tools out there are more write once, compile for multiple platforms, so that you in the end you have, let's say, a Linux version and a Windows version and a Mac version and a Palm version and etc. Now Mono is more along the lines of Java in that regard, in that it doesn't actually compile to native code. It compiles for a runtime environment, for essentially an interpreter. So what you have is one executable file that usually has a .exe at the end that can run on Linux and Windows and OS X.
People don't like to see that .exe if they're not on Windows.
They can cope.
Tell you.
People can cope. So so let's get right into it, though.
Okay.
So now Mono allows you to do a lot of stuff. It's a very rich framework. This is great. People are obviously using .NET over in Microsoft land for quite some time now.
There's not as many .NET applications on the Windows side as I thought there would be by now. I mean, there are some
there's more and more
substantial ones to be sure, but I honestly thought, I mean, what, .NET's been around since like 2000.
Well,
I honestly
but
thought 9 years into the game.
You know, a lot of applications started development before then, or companies. If a company already has an investment into Win32 C++ development, they're not going to shift everything.
It's just not been as big as I expected it to be.
No, it really hasn't. But it is big. If you look around for jobs, you'll notice there's lots of C# jobs. Now, the reason this is great from the Mono standpoint is if you're a Mac developer or a Linux developer, it's awfully nice to be able to say on your resume, I have worked on or possibly even shipped C# and .NET code for whatever platform.
Right.
This opens you up to a lot more work, and it's just a generally good thing as a developer. Now, from the pure standpoint of whether or not the language and the framework create great applications, whole different story. Let's get into that right now.
All right.
All right. So first up, in order to create a great application, obviously you need a great development environment. You need a tool set that is awesome. Now, if you're making a .NET application, you've got Visual Studio, which even if you're a guy like me that does most of your development under Linux, oftentimes in VMs, but you tend to do most of your development hosted under Linux. You still got to give
Visual Studio the nod,
You still got to give Visual Studio the nod. It's a fantastic tool set, and even the people who hate it and prefer things like Eclipse or NetBeans, still you've got to look at Visual Studio and say, yeah, it does a lot of stuff, and it does a lot of stuff very well.
Okay.
So there is that. Let's take that and put it off to the side and pretend like Visual Studio doesn't exist for a while. So now, here we go with MonoDevelop. MonoDevelop's really, right now, only available for Windows and OS X. Sorry, Linux and OS X. Yeah, you almost got me. The Windows version you can get. You can build it.
We're talking MonoDevelop,
and you can check it out. Yeah, for MonoDevelop.
The Mono IDE.
Yes.
All right.
Now, MonoDevelop is the IDE for Mono applications.
All right.
I mean, there are others that you can use, and you can use Sharp Develop and all these sorts of things, but MonoDevelop is the way to go for creating Mono applications. The Windows binary is really not there yet. The Linux and OS X version is. Now, the 2.0 version of MonoDevelop just came out.
Oh.
Roughly a year after the 1.0 version.
Now, Mono, the runtime environment and the language, has been around longer than MonoDevelop. That seems like, how do you do that? How do you... I mean, were you just doing it all in...
Well, MonoDevelop is just an IDE that calls a lot of command line tools.
So you were just doing it all in like a VI
command line
or Emacs?
Or using Visual Studio.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So technically, you can create an application, a .NET application, say for .NET 2.0, using WinForms for your Visual IDE and run it in Mono without ever even touching MonoDevelop. However, of course, you want to be able to develop on the platform you're targeting. To develop a Linux application, but only be able to use a Windows-only IDE, that's not going to cut it. That cheese is bad cheese, it's stinky, and it goes outside. Yeah. That cheese goes outside, as I point to Chris. So what I'm saying here is MonoDevelop provides a needed niche. Now,
gotcha.
So a few things that we need to talk about first here.
Okay.
The primary windowing toolkit, the method upon which controls are placed on the screen, is GTK.
GNOME.
It is the default, the GNOME toolkit, basically.
Which, I'm going to be honest, I like. It does not look so awesome under KDE or OS X, though.
Right. Now, in Windows, it actually looks fine.
It does.
But
they have like a Windows GTK theme or
something. That works out very nicely.
Yeah, the KDE ones, they have like half hours support, and the OS X ones are cheap.
In some KDE distros, it's better than others, but no, I hear what you're saying. It is a problem,
especially under KDE4.
So what that means though is this is a great environment user experience wise. If you're a GNOME guy, if you're making a GTK application and you want it to look good on Ubuntu or Debian or OpenSUSE or Fedora, the GNOME versions, it's heaven. It's Nirvana heaven.
All right.
And it provides one of the most seamless experiences available for designing an interface and coding that interface on the Linux side of things. As in, you can simply drop a button, place it on your window, put a couple of text boxes on the window, place a toolbar on your window, lay it out just so, and then immediately go in and start editing the code for the events for those user interface components.
I like that.
Now, of course, that's kind of become a standard de facto thing for a truly powerful IDE nowadays, and has been for a few years. Unfortunately, up until recently, the main method for developing GNOME applications has been you create the user interface file in one tool.
Right. Right.
And then you reference that
Is that
from your
Glade?
code in another tool. Glade is one
Glade's
of the
where you
libraries
design
used
it.
Right.
And that
And
just
there are
seems so
others. There's others, but yeah.
zero development skills here, but to me that seems so disjointed.
It's actually the same as how OS 10 does it.
It just seems like so extracted.
It is. It's very extracted, and there are some good points to it.
Like what?
It forces people to use a very good model view controller paradigm to where you keep the code and the UI very separate, which is a very good thing.
Okay, now I can see how that could be a good thing.
Now, that is a good thing because it forces the issue.
Right.
Now, it doesn't necessarily make that issue any easier,
But
but
if
it does force it. And so if you're a
Okay.
lazy developer or you have lazy developers on your team, forcing the issue sometimes is very nice.
Okay.
Now, if you're,
I'm sure there's other perks too.
there's
someone
other
will
perks,
chime
yeah.
up and say that
There's
I'm a retard,
plenty.
but-
And honestly, there's been so many great applications produced, you can obviously see that it works.
Yeah, that's
However, now that we've got MonoDevelop, and there are others, but now that we've got MonoDevelop, it works very, very nicely. And it has actually for quite some time, since the 1.0 release for the user interface design. And they've continued to improve that. But again, it is only for GTK applications. That includes Windows and OS 10.
Oh.
So if you're building a UI-based application, a nice desktop app, you can make it very powerful because GTK is a very powerful toolkit.
I guess
But
that was the
it's-
same for Qt Creator, which we talked about 2 episodes ago.
It is.
Or
It's exactly the
Qt
same.
Designer, which
Qt Creator.
Qt Creator, which we covered 2 episodes ago in this series.
Right.
Same deal.
It's the same problem. They use their own UI framework, and fortunately, that means actually less bugs and more flexibility for you as a developer.
Oh, because
It
I guess there's
means-
less variables if it's always
exactly.
the same.
When you have, and we'll get into this a little bit in the next video. We're going to be talking about Real Basic in the next one, which, and the only reason I'll bring that up right now is Real Basic develops against the native widgets,
right.
which means it has to develop against whatever is the lowest common denominator. A great example of this is a checkbox, right?
Okay.
Now, a checkbox by default and in the standard definition, it has 2 states, checked and unchecked,
Right.
right?
Right.
However, many platforms have multiple state checkboxes. There's checked, unchecked, that little state where there's like a line in
Yeah.
it, where it's like multi-check
Right.
and various other things.
Seen that.
Well, now, if you have multiple platforms, you can only do whatever is the minimum that all the platforms
on
can
or
do.
off.
It's on or off. So actually, in the end, you end up with less powerful applications. Now, when you're talking about developing a GTK application, which actually is GTK Sharp, which is just GTK use bindings for C Sharp, they allow you to develop against the full power of GTK, which is very, very powerful. Just like Qt is very powerful. You can create some great applications with it, and it's very, very good. However, you're probably going to get some backlash if you release this as a commercial or even open source project for OS 10, because the OS 10 people are going to look at it.
They
For
get
one,
all
it's going to
worked
be a
up.
little bit harder to install because people are going to have to install Mono and GTK. But on top of that, it's not going to look like a Mac application.
And they get
not without.
They get all ruffled
They get
up
their
about that.
tizzies are all in a fit, and their feathers are
It
pointy
seems
up.
like though having to distribute the mono runtime could be
It's not that bad.
Seems like it
It's-
could be. Now, can you?
It seems like it could be, but honestly, the real problem is that the perception is it's hard. But Mono, the runtime is not that big.
Do you know? And I know this is kind of off the cuff, but do you know if the licensing around the mono runtime, can you bundle it with your application, or you have to link out?
I
to it?
I believe you have to link out to it. I believe you'll have to include it as separate.
So if you
downloads
have
or
like an
something like
installer that
yeah.
downloaded and installed it, which
Right, it's fine.
that's not too bad.
It's not too bad.
As long as the
And,
person has
and
internet.
honestly, a lot of applications do that very sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that big of a deal. It's not ideal though. You're not creating a single file
All right, let me ask
that
you
you can
about
just
this.
move between platforms.
Let me ask you.
Honestly, now we went over Qt Creator and Flex Builder. To be honest, both of them provide a much easier experience for distributing a single application than Mono does. So,
Now, is
so
it the
that's other
case
side.
with, say, Java? If I have Java runtime version 1.44 because this application only runs in Java runtime 1.44, and then I get another Java
Okay.
application that requires Java runtime 1.77.
Mm-hmm.
If I upgrade, I break the other app. I have to basically choose which
Yeah.
app is more important
You can
for
have
me to
multiple
run.
versions of Java on one machine.
On Windows?
I don't know on Windows.
Yeah, 'cause this is the only time I've run into
don't
this
know
is
on
on
Windows.
Windows.
So no, okay.
But
So
is this an issue with mono? I mean, is there only one mono runtime per machine, or can each application have its own mono runtime?
I've only ever put one Mono runtime per machine, so I don't know the answer to
Alright,
that. But theoretically, it should work. Mono is like its .NET cousin on the Windows side, very backwards compatible.
Okay,
That's kind of
true.
the thing. So
you can only have one .NET runtime, but it does support all the previous versions. Really
it's
well.
it's like every previous version of the .NET runtime is. I don't know if this is exactly how it's done internally because I've never seen the code for .NET. But you know, it's almost like it's with it. It's like you get 2.0 along with 3.5. So now when you're dealing with Mono, MonoDevelop has been notoriously not the greatest in the world to develop against. It has some cool tools, and 1.0 was awesome, and I did some work with it, and I do recommend it for certain projects, but as of 1.0, it didn't even have a debugger, which is hard to live without a debugger. MonoDevelop 2.0 has a nice debugger, has good debugging features in it. It's very, very nice. And honestly, that's the key thing, in my opinion, for MonoDevelop 2.0. It has a lot of other features, a ton of other features, because these guys have been working tirelessly on it.
Crazy. This feature
However,
is great.
the primary feature really is the integrated debugger, because it had a good integrated GTK forms designer, which is necessary. But now that they have an integrated debugger, now we've got an actual professional development environment that we can really work with here. So this really kind of steps it up into the major leagues. Now, there isn't a Windows version yet. There really needs to be, because if you're dealing with a cross-platform development environment, especially if you're working on a team, which MonoDevelop is great with if you're working on a team. Working on C# and Mono projects on a team of people, using MonoDevelop to check into CVS and Subversion works incredibly well. I can't recommend it enough for doing teamwork. In fact, I recommend it much more strongly than I would say Flex Builder or even a lot of the other projects we're going to be covering next for doing
the change control management.
It does a very good job at that. It does a very good job at handling the check-ins and the merges. I mean, as does a lot of other projects, especially if you're dealing with Eclipse. Eclipse is like the king when it comes to that. Okay. But MonoDevelop does a very, very nice job.
When they say here that it has multiple target frameworks and the .NET 3.0 and 3.5 target frameworks are now fully supported, does that mean that it has feature parity with .NET 3.5?
No. What that means is, all right, so MonoDevelop can read in the project file formats from Visual Studio. What you can actually do in MonoDevelop is create a project that targets .NET 3.0 or 3.5 as a project.
Okay.
That's what it means. That does not mean that the underlying Mono has full support for .NET, say, 3.5. It's a little confusing. I wish it was a little clearer on that. But just the same, that's what that means.
But if I've done a Visual Studio project and I've used the .NET 3.5 frameworks, I can be fairly sure I can pretty much guarantee that MonoDevelop's going to be able to open that project up.
Right.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
It's not bad.
Flexibility
it gives some flexibility. They've done a pretty good job on it.
That's nice in a shop that runs Windows and Linux.
This is what I'm saying. What we really need is a good solid version of MonoDevelop 2.0 or 2.1 or what have you for Windows as well. And once we've got it for all three platforms, then I think we're really going to be cooking with canola oil here, is what I'm saying. You know what I mean?
Nice.
Canola oil is good for the arteries.
Yeah.
And it's still pretty smooth.
I like peanut oil because it's higher burn point and it adds just a little bit of delicious. But I got
peanut oil. So now I lost my train of thought. Now all I'm thinking about is peanut oil, and that's fantastic. But just the same, has nothing to do with MonoDevelop.
It seems like they're adding other features in that. I mean, they're not just trying to chase Visual Studio. They're doing other things outside of that.
They are their own development environment. They really are a development environment targeted at Linux specifically for GTK. That is what it's targeted at.
They're doing things to support things like dbus and libnotify.
Exactly.
And all those are all Linux specific.
There's a lot of add-ons that you can get for it. It's got a nice plugin architecture, and that already is evident if you start going in and editing the UI. That's like its own plugin.
It's got support for HTML.
Now, yeah.
So you can do HTML coding.
Well, that's the thing is because that's .NET. ASP.NET. You can develop your own web services,
which has HTML
web applications.
Yeah,
you can develop it in either VB.NET or C#.
That's funny.
So creating web applications in Mono is very reasonable. It's very, very doable. It's impressive.
I'm looking at the screenshots over at monodevelop.com, and you know what? It looks like a really feature complete. It looks like an application.
This thing's got a lot of buttons on it, guys.
Yeah. I mean, what I mean though is it looks it has the appearance of something that people have paid
It's pro.
$1,000
No,
for.
it is. It's very pro. They've done a very nice job. Now, a few things it is missing. If you're coming to Linux from, say, Windows, and you've been a .NET shop, and one of the things that would be nice to be able to do is to provide companies a transition point to say, you've created these .NET applications for your desktop, for your business, now bring them over to Linux or OS X and use MonoDevelop as your tool set. However, not overly doable for most cases, and the reason being is that most .NET applications are using WinForms, which is it's the .NET Windows UI implementation.
That's their version of GTK.
That's their version of GTK, and they are not compatible with each other. You're going to have to create a whole new UI. Now, however, Mono itself runs WinForms, so you can run WinForm applications.
But then it doesn't look native on Linux.
Plus, on top of that, there's no way to visually design and lay out a WinForms application in Mono. Only GTK.
Right.
Now you can edit the code, and if you know what you're doing,
there's just no visual ranger.
You can edit the code to change how it looks, but there's no way to visually lay it out.
But the
which
plus
most
side,
developers, I mean, honestly, let's be clear, most developers are going to need, especially if you have an in-house IT staff that's just cobbling together a database front end or something like that. They need those visual tools.
But if someone comes to you and says, I need to make this application, and you get bonus points if you can release it for Linux,
it's doable. That's the thing, is you can create a .NET application somewhere else in Visual Studio and create a .NET 2.0 application.
The thing is, which is kind of an advantage here, is GTK on Windows looks pretty good.
It looks good.
It's to the point now where you almost don't even know it's a GTK app.
And to be honest, for a lot of the controls available, you're actually going to get more features out of the GTK versions of the controls than you would out of the standard Win32 versions of the controls.
I was using
so it's phenomenal. A great example is go check out like Pigeon, right? Everyone uses Pigeon, or at least sometimes, for their instant messaging, and it's a very simple application. But it uses GTK for all of the UI on Windows, and no one ever notices because it looks great. It works just fine.
Initially, and I think some people had some concerns. A year ago or 2 years ago, it didn't look super great, but now
they fixed it up.
was using an application just today for a security audit I was doing. I didn't even know it was an application written in GTK until I right-clicked and went copy, and it had a little gnome icon of the clipboard.
Yep.
And I had no idea until that point.
But it works fine.
Yeah,
it works great,
yeah.
and it integrates just fine.
Yep.
So this absolutely works good. Now, it is a free option for those of you running currently Linux or OS X. Honestly, I recommend checking it out primarily if you're a Linux first developer. It's great for developing Linux primary applications that you expect your main market to be Linux on, or if you just love Linux more than your other platforms.
But okay, so
you can still distribute for OS X and Windows, and that is awfully nice.
You're an independent software guy, and a client comes to you and says, Brian, we want an application for Windows, Mac, and Linux.
Crazy talk.
And you're sitting there as Brian, and you're going, well, I've just watched these 4 cross-development series. Do I go with Qt Creator at this point, or do I go with MonoDevelop?
It depends entirely on what it is that you're comfortable with at this point. And I'm going to be very, very clear on that, because a lot of it boils down to how productive can you be? Because what's the point in developing with a cross-platform development solution if you don't know your face from your butt? You know what I'm saying?
Well, the client's asking, they want it to run on all 3 platforms.
But this is what I'm saying. As a developer, you want to be able to deliver for your clients or for your potential clients the fastest and best you possibly can.
Sure.
So let's say now if you go with Qt Creator, you're going to be developing in C++. You go with Flex Builder, it's going to be an action script in MXML. You go with MonoDevelop, you're going to be in C# or VB.NET and GTK.
Right.
There's going to be some very differences. So
and the languages have different capabilities.
Going with Flex Builder versus MonoDevelop is a huge difference, and I would use them for very different applications. MonoDevelop is going to integrate very, very well the applications you create, if you do it right, into a GNOME desktop.
Right.
Now, Flex Builder is not going to so well because that's not what it was intended for. So it is kind of up in the air.
Okay.
We've got a couple more IDEs to go through before I really want to lay down the law and say what it is I think people should be using.
Okay.
I'm going to let people kind of make up their own mind until we get there.
We're going to give you the facts first.
That's right. So I just want to lay everyone out there on that. If you have any questions, head over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/forum. There's a little Linux Action Show question there. There's a general section in there. Go ahead and ask in either of them.
Absolutely.
And I'll try and do my best to stay on top of it. There's also some great devs that come by the forum from time Tubetime.
You guys know who you
and
are.
check in on there. So it's a great place to ask questions if you're concerned at all. Now, next up, we're going to talk about Real Basic, which is jumping even further into the potential controversy area because it's a completely commercial, completely closed source, cross-platform development environment.
It's literally check a box and it builds it for that platform natively.
It is. Has a lot of good stuff, has a lot of bad stuff, but we're going to get into it next, and then you can choose for yourself which way you should go.
There you have it. All right, if you'd like to follow us on Twitter, maybe you have some advice or have some questions, I am twitter.com/ChrisLAS.
And I am Bryan with a YLAS.
There you have it. Thanks so much, everyone, for watching this episode of An In-Depth Look. We'll see you soon with the next part of this installment. The next installment of this series.
Of the part next.
Part of the next installment.
You can stop talking now.